A group of well-dressed businessmen walked in, their expensive suits and air of entitlement unmistakable. They were the type of customers Colson had always catered to, the ones who snapped their fingers for service and barely glanced at the staff. Jamal immediately noticed the way one of the newer waitresses, Maria, tensed when she saw them. He leaned in. "You okay?" She hesitated. They don't treat people like me well." Jamal's jaw tightened. He had seen it before. Customers who talked down to employees, who acted like the staff were invisible unless they wanted something. Under Colson's rule, people like that were encouraged to behave that way. Not anymore. Jamal took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and walked over to greet them himself. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said with a professional but firm tone. "Welcome to Colson's." Actually, scratch that. "Welcome to Carter's Steakhouse." One of the men frowned. "Carter's?" Jamal's lips curled slightly. "New management. New name." The men exchanged glances but didn't comment. Instead, one of them waved dismissively at Maria. "We'll take her as our server." Maria's face paled. Jamal didn't even blink. "Maria will be happy to assist you, if you treat her with respect. If not, I'll be taking over your table myself." The businessman scoffed. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Jamal said evenly. "The days of treating my staff like servants are over. We serve food, not egos." A heavy silence fell over the table. The businessmen exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them opened his mouth as if to argue, but something about Jamal's stance, the quiet confidence in his eyes, shut it down before it could start. Finally, the leader of the group sighed. "Fine, we'll be professional." Jamal nodded. "Glad to hear it." Then he turned to Maria. "If they give you any trouble, you let me know." Maria's eyes shone with gratitude. She gave him a small, relieved nod before heading to get their drink orders. From the corner of his eye, Jamal noticed other employees watching the exchange. Servers who had spent years swallowing mistreatment. Cooks who had been yelled at for things beyond their control. And in that moment, Jamal realized something. This wasn't just about him proving he could run a restaurant. It was about proving that they all deserved better. He turned, catching Elliot Donovan watching him from a booth near the bar. The older man lifted his glass slightly in approval, a knowing smile on his face. Jamal exhaled, feeling something new settle deep inside him, something that had taken years to earn. Respect. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving, he was leading. By the time the dinner rush hit, the restaurant was running smoother than it had in years. The tension from earlier had settled, replaced by something Jamal had never seen in this place before: pride. The staff moved with purpose, backs a little straighter, eyes a little brighter. Maria had just finished serving the businessmen, and as she passed Jamal, she whispered, "They said, 'Thank you,' when they left." Her eyes gleamed with something close to disbelief. Jamal smirked. Guess people can change when they're forced to. The night was going well, but Jamal knew there was one final test he had to pass. Handling a difficult situation without Donovan stepping in to save him. And it came just as the clock struck 8 o'clock. The front doors swung open, and in walked a woman Jamal instantly recognized. Colson's daughter, Victoria. She was dressed in designer clothes, her manicured nails tapping against her expensive purse. Behind her was a small entourage of equally wealthy-looking friends. Jamal's stomach tensed. Victoria had never officially worked at the restaurant, but everyone knew she had power. She was her father's eyes and ears, and she had used that influence to get employees fired simply because she didn't like their vibe. And now she was here. She strode to the hostess stand and barely spared a glance at the young hostess. "We'll take the best table in the house." The hostess hesitated, glancing nervously at Jamal. Jamal stepped forward. "Good evening, Victoria. We'd be happy to seat you." She barely looked at him. "Oh, it's you. My father's charity case." A few nearby employees stiffened. Jamal felt the heat of their stares, waiting to see how he would respond. He kept his voice calm. "Your father no longer owns this restaurant, and I'm not a charity case. I'm the manager." Victoria's head snapped up, her perfect eyebrows shooting toward her hairline. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Jamal said, keeping his tone even. "If you'd like to dine here, you're welcome to." But if you're here to cause a scene, I'll have to ask you to leave." Her friends snickered behind her, clearly enjoying the rare moment of seeing her caught off guard. Her cheeks burned red with embarrassment. "You think you can just throw me out?" she hissed. Jamal folded his arms. "Your father did that to me yesterday. Seems fair, don't you think?" A hush fell over the restaurant. Every customer had stopped pretending not to listen. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, it looked like she might explode, but then she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and forced a tight smile. "Fine," she said. "We'll stay, but don't expect a tip." Jamal chuckled. "That's okay. I'd rather my staff be treated with respect than get a few extra dollars from someone who doesn't understand the value of hard work." Her mouth fell open, but before she could fire back, her friends grabbed her by the arm and led her to the table, laughing under their breath. As she sat down, Donovan appeared at Jamal's side, sipping a glass of wine. "That," he said, nodding toward Victoria, "was the real test." Jamal turned to him. "And?" Donovan grinned. "You passed." Jamal exhaled, the last of his doubts fading away. He had proven himself, not just to Donovan, not just to the staff, but to himself. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was his restaurant now, and he was going to make sure it became a place where everyone, staff and customers alike, was treated with the dignity they deserved. For the first time in his life, Jamal wasn't just standing up for himself, he was standing up for all of them. "You said," as the night came to an end, the restaurant hummed with a different kind of energy, one Jamal had never felt here before. There was laughter from the staff, genuine smiles from the servers as they finished their last rounds, and a warmth in the air that had nothing to do with the kitchen's heat. For the first time, the employees weren't just working, they were thriving. Jamal stood near the entrance, watching as the last customers filtered out. Maria wiped down a nearby table, pausing to glance at him. She said with a small smile, "I think tonight was the first time I actually enjoyed working here." Jamal chuckled. "That makes two of us." A deep voice from behind made him turn. More than two. It was one of the senior chefs, Andre, a man who had been in the industry for decades. He crossed his arms, studying Jamal with an approving nod. "I've been in this business long enough to know when a place is run by fear, and when it's run by respect." "Night?" This place finally felt right. A few of the other employees murmured in agreement. Some nodded. Others simply met Jamal's gaze with a newfound sense of trust. That was when it truly hit him. This wasn't just about being in charge. This was about change. The kind of change that didn't just affect him. It affected all of them. Elliot Donovan approached, his usual calm confidence in place. "Not bad for your first night as manager," he said. Jamal let out a breathless laugh. "You sure know how to throw someone into the deep end," Donovan smirked. "And you sure know how to swim." He reached into his jacket, pulling out an envelope. "This is for you." Jamal hesitated before taking it. He opened it, his eyes widening at the sight of the official paperwork inside. It wasn't just a contract confirming his role as manager. It was ownership shares in the restaurant. Jamal's breath caught. "Wait. What is this?" Donovan's expression turned serious. "I don't just want you to run this place, Jamal. I want you to own it." Jamal's heart pounded in his chest. "But why?" Donovan's gaze softened. "Because I see something in you that people like Colson never did. You care. You lead with integrity. And you remind me of the man I was when I started." He placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "This restaurant needs you, and so does everyone in it." Jamal swallowed hard. The weight of what Donovan was offering settled deep inside him, not as a burden, but as a purpose. For years, he had been just another worker, unseen and undervalued. But now he was building something greater, something lasting. He looked around at the employees, his team, and made a silent vow. This wasn't just about proving Colson wrong. It wasn't even about proving himself right. This was about setting a new standard. A place where respect wasn't a privilege, it was a given. Jamal turned back to Donovan, his grip tightening around the papers. "I won't let you down," he said firmly. Donovan's smile was knowing. "I already knew that. As Jamal looked around the restaurant, his restaurant, he realized something. This wasn't just a job. This was the beginning of a legacy. "We don't serve your kind here." That was the moment everything changed for one black waiter. He was fired for helping the wrong customer, or so they thought. But the next day, he walked back in, and when the truth came out, you will be shocked. The evening rush had just begun at Colson's Steakhouse, a high-end restaurant where the rich and entitled dined as if the world revolved around their presence. Soft jazz hummed through the speakers. The clatter of silverware echoed across the dimly lit space, and the scent of seared steaks filled the air. It was just another busy night, until it wasn't. Jamal Carter, a young black waiter, moved swiftly between tables, balancing a tray of entrees with practiced ease. He had been working here for nearly 2 years, pouring his heart into the job, dreaming of something bigger, but for now, he needed this paycheck. He knew his place in the pecking order. A waiter wasn't seen. A waiter wasn't heard. A waiter was just there. But then, something happened that would change his life forever. A man walked in. Not just any man, but someone who didn't quite fit the usual clientele. His clothes were worn, his shoes scuffed, and his face carried the weight of a hard life. The hostess, a blonde woman with a sharp gaze, took one look at him and sneered. "I think you're in the wrong place," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. The man hesitated. "I was just hoping for a meal." She scoffed. "Sir, this is a fine dining establishment. We don't serve your kind here." Jamal, who had been heading to the kitchen, froze. His heart pounded. He had heard those words before, not directed at him this time, but he knew their sting. His mother had been turned away from stores when he was a child. He had seen his uncle forced to leave a restaurant just because of the color of his skin. And now, here it was again, right in front of him. Every fiber in his being told him to stay quiet, to ignore it, to walk away. But he couldn't. "Ma'am, we have a table open near the back," Jamal said, stepping forward. His voice was steady, but inside he was shaking. "I can seat him." The hostess's eyes flashed with irritation. "Jamal, this isn't your call. I'll take responsibility," he insisted. "Everyone deserves a meal." The man looked at him, something unspoken passing between them. A silent thank you. Reluctantly, the hostess stepped aside, rolling her eyes. "Fine, but don't expect a tip from someone like that." Jamal led the man to the table, ignoring the whispers from nearby guests, the disapproving glances. He took his order, made sure everything was perfect, and even covered the bill himself when he saw the hesitation in the man's eyes. To him, it wasn't about money. It was about dignity. But dignity had a price. At the end of his shift, as he was cleaning up, the restaurant's owner, Mr. Colson himself, stormed in. His face was red with anger, veins bulging at his temple. "What the hell do you think you were doing?" he snapped. Jamal looked up, confused. "Sir, you humiliated this restaurant by serving a bum, a nobody. Do you have any idea who we cater to? People who matter. People with money." Jamal swallowed hard. "I thought we catered to people who were hungry." The room went silent. The other waiters stopped in their tracks. Even the hostess, who had been watching smugly from the side, looked stunned. Colson's lips curled. "You thought wrong. You're fired. Get out." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He wanted to fight back, to say something, anything, but what was the point? This was how the world worked. People like him weren't supposed to push back. So he nodded, untied his apron, and walked out the door, feeling the weight of injustice pressing down on him. But what no one knew, what no one even suspected, was that the man he had served that night was not just some random stranger. And tomorrow everything would change. Jamal barely slept that night. The weight of what had happened pressed on his chest like a heavy stone. He had done the right thing, hadn't he? But doing the right thing had cost him his job. Rent was due in a week. His mom was relying on him to help with bills. The thought of letting her down gnawed at his insides. Still, as he stared at the ceiling of his tiny apartment, something deep inside him refused to feel regret. That man had deserved respect. A warm meal, a simple act of kindness. And yet, kindness had gotten him thrown out like trash. Morning came too fast. His phone buzzed with messages from co-workers, some offering quiet support, others warning him to let it go. But one text stood out, an unknown number. "Come to the restaurant at noon. Trust me." Jamal's heart pounded. Who was this? Was it a setup? Was he walking into more humiliation? But something told him to go. By the time he arrived outside Colson's Steakhouse, nerves twisted in his stomach. Through the glass doors, he could see the restaurant buzzing with the lunch crowd. Everything looked normal, except for the tension in the air. The hostess, the same one who had sneered at the man the night before, looked pale. The kitchen staff peeked through the swinging doors, whispering amongst themselves. Something was off. And then he saw him, the man from last night. But he wasn't wearing the same worn-out clothes. He wasn't hesitating at the entrance. He walked in with authority, with purpose. And right behind him was Mr. Colson, whose face was a shade paler than usual. The man's voice carried through the restaurant, calm but firm. "Where is the young man who served me last night?" Silence. Jamal swallowed hard and stepped forward. "I'm here." Mr. Colson flinched, but the man's expression softened. He smiled. "Good. Because we need to talk." Jamal's pulse quickened. What was happening? And why did it feel like everything was about to change in the most unexpected way? The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Servers paused mid-step. Customers glanced around curiously, and the hostess, who had been so quick to dismiss the man last night, now looked as if she wanted to disappear into the floor. Jamal stood frozen, his heart hammering in his chest as the man took a step closer. There was something different about him today. Something commanding. His posture was straight, his eyes sharp, his presence undeniable. Mr. Colson forced a stiff smile. "Mr. Donovan, please, let's step into my office to discuss." "Right here is fine," the man interrupted. Jamal's stomach twisted. Mr. Donovan. That name. Why did it sound familiar? Then it hit him. Elliot Donovan. The billionaire, the philanthropist, the CEO of one of the country's largest hospitality chains. The man who owned dozens of luxury hotels and restaurants. And last night, Jamal had unknowingly served him. Jamal's eyes darted between Donovan and Mr. Colson, whose forced smile had started to tremble. "You fired this young man for showing basic human decency," Donovan said, his voice steady but laced with disappointment. "You humiliated him for treating me, the nobody, with respect." A murmur swept through the restaurant. Customers exchanged shocked glances. Servers whispered among themselves. Mr. Colson let out a dry chuckle, his forehead glistening. "It was a misunderstanding." "No," Donovan cut in, his voice dropping an octave. "It was discrimination. And let me be clear, I do not tolerate that in any business under my name." Silence. Jamal's breath hitched. "Under his name?" Colson's expression crumbled. His hands trembled at his sides. What do you mean?" Donovan turned, scanning the room. "As of this morning, I own this restaurant." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The kitchen doors swung open as more staff stepped out, drawn by the commotion. The hostess let out a strangled gasp, and one of the senior chefs cursed under his breath. Jamal's knees nearly buckled. Did he hear that right? Donovan turned back to him, his expression softening. "Jamal, you were the only person in this entire place who treated me like a human being. And I reward loyalty and kindness." Jamal's throat tightened. He wasn't sure where this was going, but he could feel the air shifting. "Effective immediately," Donovan continued, his voice ringing through the restaurant. "Colson is out. And you," he took a step closer, "are the new manager." Jamal's breath caught. The new... what? The entire restaurant erupted in gasps and whispers. The staff gawked. The hostess turned ghostly white. And Mr. Colson. He looked like he might pass out. Jamal's lips parted, but no words came out. His hands trembled at his sides. This had to be a dream. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. "I don't know what to say," Jamal stammered. "Say yes," Donovan said simply. "Say yes and show them what real leadership looks like." Jamal swallowed hard. his entire life flashing before his eyes. Every struggle, every moment he had been overlooked, dismissed, and mistreated. And then, for the first time in his life, he smiled with certainty. Yes. The moment the word left Jamal's lips, the entire restaurant seemed to shift. The weight that had been pressing down on his chest for years, of being unseen, undervalued, and dismissed, suddenly lifted. The stunned silence was quickly replaced by murmurs, some in shock, others in admiration. Mr. Colson, however, looked like he had been hit by a freight train. His mouth opened and closed as if searching for the right words to undo what had just happened. This is ridiculous," he spluttered, his voice cracking. "You can't just walk in here and take my restaurant." Donovan raised an eyebrow. "I think you'll find I can." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a document. With a flourish, he handed it over to Colson, who snatched it up with trembling fingers. His eyes darted over the fine print, and with each passing second, the color drained from his face. "This is a buyout agreement." Colson's voice was barely above a whisper. "This morning? You planned this?" Donovan nodded. "Last night I was just a hungry man looking for a meal. But after what I experienced, I knew I couldn't just walk away." He turned toward Jamal. "People like him don't just deserve better. They are better. And your restaurant? It's no longer yours." Colson staggered back as if the words had physically struck him. For years he had run this place with an iron fist, believing he was untouchable. But now, his reign was over. He glared at Jamal, his expression twisted with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You think you can run this place? A waiter?" Jamal stood taller. The words should have hurt, but they didn't. Not anymore. He met Colson's eyes and spoke with a quiet confidence that surprised even himself. "I've been running this place for years. You were just too blind to see it." A few of the staff, the ones who had always been overlooked and underappreciated, exchanged knowing glances. They knew the truth. They had seen Jamal step up time and time again. And now, he was getting what he had always deserved. Colson let out a bitter laugh, tossing the contract onto the nearest table. "Fine. You'll fail without me." He turned on his heel and stormed toward the door. No one stopped him. As the door slammed behind him, a strange silence settled over the restaurant. The employees looked to Jamal, unsure of what would happen next. The customers, still processing everything, watched with wide eyes. And then, Donovan clapped a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Ready to get to work, boss?" Jamal exhaled slowly, taking in the moment. Just yesterday, he had been another nameless waiter, fired for doing the right thing. Today, he was the manager of the very restaurant that had tossed him aside. A slow, confident smile spread across his face. "Let's do this." Jamal stood in the middle of the restaurant, still trying to process the whirlwind of events that had just unfolded. Less than 24 hours ago, he was tossed out like he didn't matter. Now, he was the manager. The staff, some supportive, others skeptical, watched him, waiting for his next move. Elliot Donovan gave him a reassuring nod. "First things first. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone but yourself. Lead how you know best." Jamal swallowed, his mind racing. He had spent years watching how things worked, and more importantly, how they didn't. He had seen good employees quit because of unfair treatment. He had seen customers treated like royalty while others were turned away based on their appearance. He had watched hard workers go unrecognized while those who played office politics got ahead. That ended today. He turned to the employees, taking a deep breath. "All right," he began, his voice steady. "I know this is unexpected for everyone, but I'm not here to shake things up just for the sake of it. I'm here to make this restaurant better, for everyone." A few skeptical glances were exchanged. The hostess, still pale from the events earlier, crossed her arms. "Better how?" she asked. "You've been one of us, a waiter. What do you know about managing a place like this?" Jamal met her gaze head-on. "I know what it's like to be disrespected. I know what it's like to work hard and get nothing in return. I know what it's like to care about the job but feel like no one notices. And I know this place can be better." The kitchen staff peeked out from behind the doors, intrigued. A few servers nodded in quiet agreement. Even those who had doubted him seemed willing to listen. Jamal squared his shoulders. So, here's how it's going to work. From now on, every employee will be treated with respect. No more favoritism, no more cutting corners, and no more discrimination. If you work hard, you'll be recognized for it. If you slack off, you'll be held accountable, equally. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some looked nervous, others hopeful. Elliot Donovan smirked, clearly impressed. And what about customer service? Jamal's expression hardened. We serve everyone with dignity. I don't care if they're rich or struggling. If they come in hungry, they'll be treated like a valued guest. No more turning people away because of how they look. No more treating certain customers like they're beneath us. A silence settled over the restaurant. The weight of his words sunk in. Then, to his surprise, a slow clap broke through the quiet. One of the cooks, a man who had been in the back for years, overlooked and ignored, grinned and nodded. About time. More claps followed. A few servers exchanged approving glances. Even the skeptical hostess looked thoughtful, as if considering that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't such a bad thing. Jamal felt something shift. For the first time, they weren't just looking at him as the waiter who got lucky. They were looking at him as a leader. Elliot Donovan leaned in and spoke just loud enough for only Jamal to hear. You're already proving you belong here. Jamal smiled, the weight of years of struggle finally lifting. Now, he said, turning back to his team, let's show everyone what this place can really be. The shift had just begun, and the energy inside Colson's Steakhouse was different. Charged, uncertain, but undeniably fresh. Jamal could feel the eyes on him. Every server, cook, and busboy was watching, waiting to see if he could live up to the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. He wasn't going to let them down. But change was never easy. The first test came faster than he expected.